Terence Bud Crawford still targeting baby, you want baby. I know that. Canelo Alvarez. Do I love it? Not really. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Terence Crawford continues his quest to land a fight with Canelo Alvarez. That's something that he wants to do, and he says, and you guys see this on the screen, Terence Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez is the biggest fight in boxing right now. Like it or not, it's just facts. A fan responded to this and says, don't sell out for a check. Terence Crawford says, never that. I am not Charlo. End quote. Now, of course, he's going to take a shot at Jermell Charlo, who fought Canelo Alvarez and virtually lost every single round when he fought against Canelo. So, I mean, from what I've seen from Crawford, I don't think he would, quote, sell out for a check, but the fight doesn't really make sense to me. I know there's going to be some people in boxing who disagree, but I will explain in this video, make sure you guys stay to the end, why I don't really prefer that fight. I think there's other great fights, and that's the reality. Like, one thing I worried about with the emergence of influencer boxing and YouTube boxing is almost people taking shortcuts in my sport of boxing, where they're treating boxing like it's Capcom versus Marvel, like it's a video game, if you will, where it's Street Fighter versus Marvel. Remember those arcade games where they had like Street Fighter characters, Guile versus Spider-Man, and then you could pick Ken or Ryu versus Wolverine? That's what boxing reminds me of when it starts doing this. I mean, you look in the heavyweight division, you have Anthony Joshua, an Olympic gold medalist, and he's getting ready to fight a once beaten boxer but lifelong MMA fighter, Francis Ngannou. And you know, I know some people blame Floyd and the Conor McGregor. I don't blame Floyd, but it's clear to me that when Floyd fought Conor McGregor, there are a lot of people who hated on the fight and said, oh, this is horrible. And then they went out and did the same thing and or called out UFC guys or Jake Paul or whatever. So I think a lot of people in boxing are quite fake, to be honest, where people condemn Floyd and say this was horrible, it's a circus. But you look at recent interviews with Canelo, recent interviews with Triple G, people who criticize Floyd for fighting against a MMA fighter in Conor McGregor, and it proved to be great business based on the amount of money that fight generated. I should know because I covered it. So some of the same critics of that fight, all of a sudden they didn't have a problem when opportunities came their way. Like now you listen more recently, Canelo's talking about fighting Jake Paul in the future, and he's not ruling it out. But when it was Floyd versus Conor McGregor, he says like basically that's not real boxing, and a lot of his fans ran with that. So that was my fear, that it would kind of, people would be looking for these like gimmicky fights. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing, to me, this is a gimmick fight. It's not that these aren't two boxers, but these are two boxers that really are kind of far apart in weight. And, you know, some people are going to say, oh, but, you know, kudos to Terence Crawford. He's daring to be great. But my true question to you guys is this. If you round up all of the daring to be great fights that you've seen in boxing in the last 5-8 years, how many of those played out in the favor of the person who was daring to be great? How many of those fights? So when Kell Brook moved up a weight class or two weight classes to fight, no guys, big drama, Triple G, did that play out in Kell Brook's favor? Yes or no? When you had Jermell Charlo just last year move up in weight to fight Canelo Alvarez, did that work out for Jermell Charlo? Or was it a complete and utter waste of time? Literally, Jermell Charlo was bombing on Canelo, who had experience at that point at 160, multiple fights at 168, and even 2 fights at 175. So Charlo literally couldn't even, Jermell at least, he literally couldn't even hurt. He couldn't hurt Canelo. So it was a stupid fight. Canelo hurt him and he couldn't hurt his opponent, and he couldn't keep Canelo off of him. I mean, that's people are trying to live off of the namesake of 2 fighters that you know, but I don't really care about that. And here, I just told you that boxing is fake. Here's another thing that makes it fake, because certain guys are protected from this, right? You have Crawford moving up 2 weight classes or so, like basically moving up a lot of weight if he were to fight against Canelo Alvarez, and he would have to move up 21 pounds from his last fight, which is the fight you see on screen with Errol Spence. But then they wouldn't ask Naoya Inoue to move up 21 pounds and fight Gervonta Davis at whatever weight class. If you ask Naoya Inoue to fight Gervonta Davis, even at 130, even though Tank is at 35, make him sacrifice, fight at a catch weight of 130, 131-ish. People say, oh, you're hating. Oh, you just want to see Naoya Inoue lose, this, that, and the third, right? And I understand that Crawford's pound for pound the goods, but at the same time, the thing that I really do not like about these scenarios is when you have Crawford, he is as advertised. He's an amazing fighter, but it's a built-in excuse, and I don't like that in boxing. I don't think that should ever be a case in boxing where a person has a built-in excuse for losing. And in these dare to be great scenarios, that's usually what happens. The person like Jermell Charlo, he says he could beat Canelo. He gets up there, fights Canelo, clearly doesn't go his way, can't hurt Canelo, and then he gets, a fat paycheck. Meanwhile, the fans are not entertained with the one-sided fight, which was obvious that it would probably be one-sided, if you look at all things considered. Like, if you use like conventional wisdom, I guess you could say. And then when it plays out like that and everything that Boxingego told you was true, then people act brand new. Like, oh man, who knew? Me? There's a lot of people who knew that the fight wouldn't be beneficial. And it's not even just these dare to be great scenarios only. Any scenario where the odds are crazily stacked against a particular fighter, usually it doesn't play out in that fighter's favor. I mean, I even found that out picking Errol Spence Jr. because Errol had been in the car crash. Errol Spence, we knew, had, I guess you could say, issues, or he had been at the weight division long, where he was like, hey man, this is going to be my last fight. We're getting to the point where it's harder and harder for me to make weight. Plus, Terence Crawford, when he fought Errol Spence, he smartly fought against David Avanesian, a complete and utter waste of time and tune-up, but at least that got him an opponent that definitely wasn't on his level, and he was able to fight, get some rounds in, keep the confidence high, get a training camp in, make weight, slaughter David Avocado, and then get some activity. Meanwhile, Errol Spence, Mr. No Tune-Ups, did just that, didn't take any tune-ups, and it showed. He looked like the worst version of Errol Spence when he fought Terence Crawford. Now, again, I do give some of that credit to Terence Crawford being a monster, but in my honest opinion, that's not all Crawford. There is things that Errol Spence probably did in preparation that at least would have gave him more of a fighting chance. I'm not mad that Errol Spence lost. I know there's a lot of clowns in the comment section. They'd be like, oh, you're just mad Errol Spence. It's a great fight. It was a 50-50 fight on paper, 60-40 or however you had it. You knew someone had to lose. it's not how he lost more than, or it's not that he lost, it's more so how he lost, where it was like a non-competitive fight. That even the like diehard Terence Crawford Bud buddies didn't predict that Spence Crawford would be one-sided for every second of the fight and Errol would get stopped and dropped 3 times. I didn't see that. So yes, some people might have said, oh, Crawford beats him by stoppage late rounds, but they at least thought the fight would be competitive, which it wasn't. So again, how many situations do you see where the person is at these crazy odds, like crazy underdog, coming off a year layoff against a very good fighter? It usually doesn't work out in that other fighter's best interest. And that's what I've seen in boxing. So people, it also happens too when you see a fighter who's no longer looking the same. You know, I've seen this time and time again where there'll be a fan favorite fighter and they're hoping that fighter can do some George Foreman stuff, pull a rabbit out the hat and relive their glory days like Al Bundy and pull out this performance out of nowhere when all their recent performances really aren't showing you that. It's showing you that this guy is no longer the same guy that you were used to seeing. And that's how you know when it's time for fighters to typically retire, when they can no longer do the things that they were known for doing in their prime. Like if it's a guy like Antonio Margarito and he has a granite chin and then you start seeing him get knocked down by just regular Joe Schmoes and his chin looks shattered, then yeah, it's probably around that time where, you know, you're not the same fighter anymore, right? And that's the reality of it. So I'm not a big fan of Canelo and Terence Crawford because of the weight disparity. And I mean, if Crawford were to move up 21 pounds and beat Canelo, then that would be good for Crawford, obviously, but it would make Canelo look really bad by losing to someone 3 divisions underneath you. I don't care if he's number 1 pound for pound or not. That's a lot of weight. You know, that's like, think about anybody who's the best in any division. Like, let's say Jaron Ennis is the top guy at welterweight. Anybody who moves up 21 pounds, no acclamation, and fights Jaron Ennis is probably getting cooked. You know what I mean? I'm talking about active fighters. If there's anybody who is 21 pounds lighter than him and doesn't like move up gradually, then they're probably getting cooked by him. So it's not even if Terence Crawford can do it. It's just, why should he? And then why should Canelo Alvarez consistently get to fight smaller people but still hold all the belts hostage at 168? Like, he just fought Jermell Charlo, who had never fought at 68. Why do I want to see him fight Crawford despite the talent that Crawford has when Crawford hasn't even really fought at 54? Why do I want to see him move up 21 pounds? And then it does sound like a cash out because Crawford, I don't doubt that he would try, but if his effort is not enough, then he just scored a bunch of money and then would probably likely retire. And I don't like situations like that where it really only benefits one person to have that fight. And that's kind of what I see here. I think there's more upside for Crawford to try to take the fight because he had if he beats Canelo, then people will just have no choice but to announce his greatness, right? And if he loses, he can always fall back on the excuse of, oh, I wasn't ready and I was too small and all that, and you made killer money and it wasted people's time. So I'm truly not a fan of this fight. Let me know what you guys think.